Hey there, guitar fanatics. You know, I have so many students that come to me that want to play cool, tasty riffs, but they can't do it because all they know is a bunch of big, clunky, funky, hard to play bar chords. You know, I was listening to some old Van Halen music the other day, and like so many others, I am still blown away by his rhythm playing. And yes, Edward had amazing tone and he could swing like nobody else, but there's another secret to why his riffs were so cool. You gotta stick around because I'm gonna share it with you in this video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. My name is Charlie Long. Let's play some guitar. You know, sometimes I have to wonder if for generations we were teaching guitar sort of backwards. I remember back in the dark ages when I started learning guitar, and although I started learning little single note melodies, which were really lame by the way, I also remember learning first position bar chords almost immediately. When any of my friends that could play a little bit showed me something, it seemed like it was always open position cowboy chords or 5 or 6 string bar chords. That was back before the internet, so we couldn't see what our favorite players were doing. I hadn't discovered guitar magazines yet. All I knew that was when I tried to play my little Kiss or Boston song that my arsenal of bar chords just didn't sound the same as what they were doing. I saw my first rock concert, which was Kiss, and even though those guys weren't exactly virtuosos, my little 12-year-old brain could compute that the way that they moved around the neck of the guitar didn't look or sound like my cowboy chords. And then I heard this. And this. And this. And maybe my favorite riff of all time. Yep, the mighty Edward Van Halen came along and totally blew up my perception of what chords and rhythm guitar in a rock and roll sense was all about. And yes, he had amazing tone and his groove was like no one else's. But let's face it, the notes he was playing were pretty cool too. But he wasn't playing bar chords. And he wasn't just moving around some power chords like a lot of the other rockers of the day. He was a master at using different intervals in different combinations, often in the same riff. And I think that was one of his secrets, his use of intervals. He was super fluent in these different intervals all over the neck, all the way through different keys, and it made his riffs sound distinctive. It made his riffs sound melodic. And he was a master at using different intervals to create different moods, whether it was dark and savage or light and playful. So let's do a couple of things today. We're going to hear and play some different intervals, and we're going to move them through a key or diatonically, which is the way I think you need to learn and practice them. We're going to break down a few Van Halen riffs, and we're going to talk about how he used different intervals in those riffs. And then you're going to go out and rule the guitar world. Cool? I thought so. So what is an interval? In the most simple sense, an interval is the space between two musical notes. Take the notes C, D, and E. There's 3 notes in that sequence, C being the first, E being the third, so that we would say that C and E are a third interval apart. Now we could play those 2 notes separately, and we would call that a melodic interval. Think of single note melodies. We could also play them simultaneously, and we would call that a harmonic interval. Think of a choir singing in harmony. Harmonic intervals are what we're going to be spending time with today. Let's walk through the intervals in a key and let's see how they sound. You know, ultimately, it's the feeling that you get when you hear these intervals that's going to influence how you use them. Music is all about trying to create a feeling for yourself or for the people that are hearing your music. Getting really well versed with these intervals is going to allow you to manipulate the feelings of your listeners, and really, to me, that's what art is all about. So, let's start with the second interval. D is the second note in the key of C, and together those two notes sound like this. That sort of sus2 sound is really familiar, and it's super useful in conjunction with the third and the fourth intervals. We'll get more into that later. How about the E note, the major third? It's really happy sounding. Contrast that with E flat, which is what we would call the minor third. Major third, minor third. Total downer. C and F together make a fourth interval. Now this interval is super interesting to me. On its own, it sounds kind of stuck and unfinished. And that's why we hear so many songs and riffs with the sus4 added. When you use it with the 2 and the 3, you get some really nice natural harmonic movement. And these sounds launched dozens of pop and rock songs back in the 80s. Or you can use different combinations of fourths to get a darker sound. Used like that, it brings to mind bands like Deep Purple and Rainbow. You'll hear Nuno Bettencourt use fourths a lot. And you'll also hear a lot of fourths if you listen to ZZ Top. Onto the fifth, and on its own, we hear it all the time. You might see a chord symbol with the name of a note and then a 5 after it, like C5. So we would have a C, a G, add another C on top, and we've got the good old power chord. Now we can also make that 5 flat, and we get the flat 5 or the tonus diabolicus. Now that sound has launched 1,000 metal songs like Metallica's Enter Sandman. You can also use it in a less ominous way. I remember a Journey song called Chain Reaction that part of it went something like this. Now, a lot less common would be the sharp 5, or I tend to think about it as the minor 6, and that would be A flat in the key of C. And we might play some sort of a riff like this. Now the sixth interval is something we hear all the time in rock, pop, country, and blues. And we've all heard this kind of a thing before. But you also hear it in rock rhythm playing all the time. Think about if you're playing a C power chord and you slide up into a first inversion C voicing. That interval between the E, which is now in the bass, and the C note is a sixth. Or we could play something like this. We could put a C on the bottom, A on the top, go down to B flat and G. That's a sixth interval also. Now I'm going to go down to play a C power chord, and I'm going to stick a G on the bottom. That brings us to the seventh interval. Now the major seventh occurs naturally in the major scale. It's a half step below the root, and in the key of C it would be a B note. Now, we don't hear that interval a whole lot in rock riffage, but 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins comes to mind. Now, the flat or minor 7 is used all the time in rock, and there are just so many examples. A couple that quickly come to mind would be the Rolling Stones' Let's Spend the Night Together, or for that matter, Satisfaction. Here's a little riff in the key of C that uses almost all the intervals that we talked about. Now, I'm not saying it's a good riff, but check it out. So you're probably thinking, okay, Charlie, what about the Van Halen riffs? So let's talk some Edward, and let's go over some ways to practice learning these intervals up and down the neck so you can get really fluent with them too. So the first Van Halen riff I played earlier in the video was Feel Your Love Tonight off the first record. Playing this in the key of E, the intro starts off mostly with single notes. But you can hear him slip that major third in there. Now in the third and fourth times through, he goes full on with the thirds, but he ends the phrase each time on a fourth interval. Sounds like this. Now, from a practice standpoint, I think learning the diatonic thirds up and down the neck is one of those fundamental skills that everyone should have. Here's a super easy way to learn and remember how to play these on every string set except the G and B strings. A note a major third apart is going to be over one string and down one fret. So take the B note at the 7th fret of the E string. If I go over to the A string and down to the 6th fret, I get D sharp. That's a major third above B. Feel Your Love Tonight is in E. So we're going to go to the 7th fret of the A string and we get an E note. Then we're going to go over to the D string and down to the 6th fret, we get G sharp. That's a major third. Now, if we go over one string and down 2 frets, we get a minor third. So starting at the E at the 7th fret of the A string, I'm going to go over to the D string and down to the 5th fret and I get a G natural, which is the minor third. Now the order of the triads in a key is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And then we're back to our major root. We're just playing thirds, but the order is the same, and we're going to call that diminished minor. So we're going to go right up the scale on the A and D strings. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, minor, back to the root. Now, as I mentioned, you can use those fingerings with every string set except the G and B strings because the B string is only tuned a third above the G string and the rest of the strings are tuned a fourth apart. So the shape is going to be a little different. A major third is on the same fret on both strings, while a minor third has a note on the higher string 1 fret below the note on the lower string. So if we start at the 9th fret of the G and B strings in the key of E, we get this. One of my favorite Van Halen riffs. It's not even the main riff of the song, but the bridge to Light Up the Skies makes me smile every time I hear it. Not only does it have an amazing groove, but the harmonic content is really awesome. Edward plays something like this. He's starting off playing a 4th interval of E and A, then he goes to the 3rd with E and G sharp, and he goes to the 2nd with E and F sharp. And then he drops down a whole step to the 3rd interval with D and F sharp, and then the 2nd again with D and E. Super cool, and it's such a great flow to the lick. Then he plays the 5th, or an E5 power chord, followed by 3 third intervals. He's got G sharp B, F sharp A, and then E and G sharp. The first time through, he throws through a little pull off to the open D as he descends. Second time through, he plays it straight. I love it. We've already talked about moving through the scale in thirds. Check out this practice exercise for combining seconds and thirds. Pick a string set. Let's do it on the A and D strings to get started. And we're going to play the E at the 7th fret. Now we're going to play the F sharp at the 4th fret of the D string. That's the second. And then we're going to play the G sharp at the 6th fret. That's the major third. Take it up the fretboard. It gets a little challenging. The fingerings change because of the spacing between the different notes. But this is a great exercise. It's great for your ear. It's great for your fretboard knowledge. You can get some great sounds because of the closeness of that first and second interval. And we're talking mostly about riffs here today, but all of this stuff has great applications for lead guitar too. Another song where Ed moves between thirds and fourths to play an uber melodic rhythm part is Dance the Night Away. That song is also in E, and in the verses, it moves between the chords E, B, A, and back to E. That's if we were playing basically bar chords. So starting on the E, he does a little sus4 thing. He drops down to B, then to A, and then back to E. Another way to see these thirds is to see them as pieces of chord voicing. So here we have an E chord. Here's B, A, here's another E voicing. And you can see where those thirds fit in. And now you can hear that he's just moving these thirds around through the scale to move the melody to where he needs it to go. And that's why practicing the thirds up and down the fretboard, like we discussed before, it's so important. You want to really get fluent with these things so you can move them around anywhere you want, anytime. Now, before we get out of here today, I want to take a look at one of my favorite riffs of all time, and that is Beautiful Girls. In the intro, he plays a combination of fourths, thirds, and fifths. That's so great. Now in the verse, he plays a fourth first, and then thirds. And then he throws a fourth in there in a different octave for a little icing on the cake. If we break down harmonically what's happening, he's basically going from E, A, D, and then back to A. But then listen to the difference if we did that with cowboy chords. And how infinitely better it sounds as a riff with our combination of intervals. Jump to the chorus and he's sliding around fourth intervals and it just sounds so tough and mean. And there's also a little trick you can do where you can get what I call a fake 7th string. So if you have a power chord on the 5th string, you put the 4th on the E string below it and it really beefs up the sound. So here's an E power chord. I'm going to stick a B note on the bottom and move that on down the neck. It really beefs up the sound. So there you have it. Now I hope you have the sound of intervals in your ears and all sorts of ideas for riffs running through your brain. Practice your different intervals in a key, up and down the fretboard. Practice them in all 12 keys. Take some songs that you already know that you're playing bigger chord voicings in. Try to shrink those chord voicings down to 2 or 3 notes and see what it sounds like. Go back and listen to the rhythm parts Eddie Van Halen played. Listen to Nuno Betancourt, for instance, and then go out and make your own music. Thanks for checking out the video. Subscribe to the channel for more great guitar stuff every week. Work hard, have fun, and never stop learning. See you soon.